You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And I want to start with a few shout-outs this week. The first one to librarians. You know, even in ordinary times, and anyway, what are ordinary times anymore? Librarians are seekers of, spreaders of, lovers of knowledge. And they're doing themselves proud. They're outdoing themselves, in fact, of late. Openly calling themselves freedom fighters, they have formed small and large groups all over the country. Just Google the words freedom fighter librarians or similar phrase and you'll see what I mean. They are on the front lines of the fight against reactionary school boards, book banning, and narrow-minded, intelligence-fearing bigots of all sorts. So support your local librarian and maybe drop in and leave her, and it's usually a her, but it's fine if it's a him, a flower maybe. They are quiet, persevering, wonderful people. I also want to heave a sigh of relief at the Justice Department, United States Department of Justice, which has announced that it is forming a new domestic terrorism unit to address the growing threat from the far violent right. Apparently, the number of FBI investigations of such violent extremists has more than doubled since the spring of 2020. And the DOJ and FBI have faced criticism in recent years for not focusing as intensely on domestic terrorism as they do on international threats. In testimony last year to Congress, FBI Director Christopher Wray said that he has more than tripled the number of agents and analysts working on domestic terror in order to handle the rapidly growing caseload. It's somewhat comforting, this news, and it does harmonize with the founder of Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, who was recently charged with seditious conspiracy in the January 6th Capitol assault. Last, I want to thank U.S. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer for having decided to retire. He did so early enough in Biden's term so that even the most rabid Republicans cannot claim that it's too near to an election, as Mitch McConnell outrageously did with over a year to go before the election, in the case of Merrick Garland's appointment, or his nomination, his failed appointment. And also, Breyer did so in a timely and dignified manner. He's 83 years old. I wish, oh God, how I wish that our beloved departed Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had done the same. She was so certain, you know, that Hillary Rodham Clinton would win the election and would appoint her successor, that she hung on until the very end, and then it was too late. At least, according to Mitch McConnell, yet again, who appointed somebody from the far right. Another woman. And Trump, of course, back to that. The result? A heavily rightward tilted Supreme Court, which we can ill afford at any time, but especially not in this polarized political climate, with Roe v. Wade imperiled, with so many other crucial cases about to come before the court, including, one could argue, democracy itself. Thank you, Justice Breyer. And we look forward to Biden's nominating the very first African-American woman as a justice, as he vowed to do in his campaign for the presidency. That will be a thrill. Finally, there's very good news coming up in our next segment, and so before we do anything else, we need to go inside the headlines. Do you remember when they said that the gender gap was a momentary fad that would fade after one or two election cycles? Well, And don't you love it when the experienced realities in which we women have lived for millennia actually are proven accurate by science, including social science? Well, possibly the most revealing study done anywhere recently was a 2016 survey, out only now so that the statistics could season, of 137,456 full-time first-year students at 184 colleges and universities in this country. This study was found by the UCLA Higher Education Research Institute to show evidence of, quote, the largest ever gender gap in terms of political leanings. 41.1% of women, an all-time high, identifying themselves as liberal or far left, compared to 28.9% men. Along parallel lines, a Knight Foundation survey of 3,014 college students asked, which do you think is more important, a diverse and inclusive society or protecting free speech rights? Male students preferred protecting free speech by a decisive 61 to 39%, possibly because it so often is used to defend even the most violent pornography, while female students favored an inclusive, diverse society over free speech by 64 to 25. The data on these students reflect trends in the electorate at large. Moreover, the scholars are largely moving into synchrony. The Pew Research Center provided the New York Times with survey data showing that among all voters, Democrats are 56% female and 42% male, while Republicans are 52% male and 48% female, for a combined gender gap of 18 points. Pew found identical gender splits among voters identifying as liberal and those identifying as conservative. The Rutgers Center for American Women in Politics noted that while, quote, significant gender differences in party identification have been evident since the early 1980s, it's clear now that the growing political engagement of women is having a major impact on the social order in ways not even yet understood. For instance, in the 2018 paper, The Suffragist Piece, by Jocelyn Barnhart of the University of California, Santa Barbara, she was the lead author for a group of scholars, and the paper argued that, quote, preferences for conflict and cooperation are systematically different for men and for women. At each stage of the escalatory ladder, women prefer more peaceful options. They are less apt to approve of the use of force and the striking of hard bargains internationally, and more apt to approve of substantial concessions to preserve peace. They impose higher audience costs because they are more approving of leaders who remain out of conflict. Period, close quote. As to whether the increasing incorporation of women into political decision-making over the past century has had an actual effect on the conflict behavior of nations, Barnhart et al. Found that the evidence is consistent with the view that the increasing enfranchisement of women, not merely the rise of democracy itself, is the cause of the peace. Period, close quote. Good God, that's breathtaking. And we're not just talking misty-eyed hug-a-tree, women are inherently more pacifistic than men stuff. It's important to remember that with any trait, we're talking about averages and distributions and not categorical distinctions. That is, some individual men will have less preference for the use of force than certain individual women, and vice versa. This is not simplistically about men bad, women good, the Calvinistic-like assumptions about the lack of free will. It depends on who's doing the defining, which is another real difference. When men said women were inherently peaceful, they meant we weren't even supposed to defend ourselves. Other consequential shifts are emerging as well as women's views become more involved and more visible with politics. Dennis Chong, a political scientist at the University of Southern California, notes that women score higher on values defined by care, fairness, benevolence, and protecting the welfare of others, reflecting greater empathy and preference for cooperation and cooperative social relations. In today's debates over free speech and cancel culture, these social, psychological, and value differences are in line with surveys showing that women are more likely than men to regard hate speech as a form of actual violence rather than one of expression, and to support laws against divisive hate speech. Stephen Pinker, professor of psychology at Harvard, writes that the most fundamental empirical generalization about violence is that it's mainly committed by men. Quote, "From the time they're boys, males play more violently than females, fantasize more about violence, consume more violent entertainment, commit the lion's share of violent crimes, take more delight in punishment and revenge, and more foolish risks in aggressive attacks, vote for more warlike policies and leaders, and plan and carry out almost all the wars and genocides." Close quote. But Pinker adds that this kind of female-oriented trend might not consist of women literally wielding more power and decisions on whether to go to war, but it can also consist in a society itself moving away from cultures of manly honor with approval of violent retaliation for insults, toughening of boys to physical punishment, veneration of martial glory. In other words, this is hugely helpful because it means that societies, which in turn means people, can change. Currently, men tend to be more obsessed with status and dominance and more willing to take risks in competing for them, while women are more likely to value health and safety and to reduce conflict. The evolutionary explanation, as many have proposed, is that for much of human prehistory and history, successful men and male coalitions could multiply mates and offspring by violent means, whereas women's reproduction was rooted in the required investment in the time it took for pregnancy and nursing. Furthermore, without women, motherless children didn't survive. Well, this would certainly reflect the findings of scholars who locate key differences between men and women, especially in the case of the emphasis that women place on preventing harm, particularly to the marginalized and to those least equipped to protect themselves. Women are as competitive as men, notes Joyce Benenson of Harvard's Evolutionary Biology Department, but they do it differently. From early childhood, girls compete using strategies that minimize the risk of retaliation. Competitive strategies include avoiding direct interference with other girls' goals, disguising competition, competing overtly only from a position of high status in the community, and enforcing equality within the female community. In a November 2021 paper, Benenson found that, quote, "consistent support for females responding with greater self-protectiveness than males was evident. Females," she wrote, "mount stronger immune responses to many pathogens, experience a lower threshold to detect and lessen tolerance to pain, awaken more frequently at night, express greater concern about physically dangerous stimuli, exert more effort to avoid social conflict, exhibit a personality style more focused on danger, react to threats with greater fear, disgust, and sadness, and develop more threat-based clinical conditions than males." Close quote. This, of course, can lead to a different kind of conflict. For one thing, females exhibit greater response to detecting sensory stimuli, find punishment more aversive, demonstrate higher effort control, and experience deeper empathy. And the extra good news is that the young show the biggest gains at self-identifying in feminism. Based on surveys conducted by the American National Election Studies, we find that the total number of voters saying they were feminists out and out grew from 28% to 34% over a 24-year period between 1992 and 2016. In other words, my life's not been wasted. The growth was larger among women, 29% to 50% than among men, and 18 to 24-year-olds showed gains that doubled from 21% to 42%. Listen, the gender gap is alive and well and capable of quietly changing the world, one statistic at a time. It's time for our first break, but we'll be back in just a moment with, back by special demand, exotic words in the Surrealism Corner. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
If we are reviving weird and wonderful words, we must be in the Surrealism Corner. Okay, here we are back by popular demand with a fistful of wonderful and weird words, all of them perfectly legitimate. You might know a couple of them if you're a wordsmith type person, but most people will not be familiar with them, and there are some gorgeous ones that should be put into more general usage. So, first up is agglutinate, agglutinate, agglutinate. It's to cause to adhere, as with glue or paste, or causing blood to clot. A next one is epiphytic, E-P-I-P-H-Y-T-I-C, epiphytic, which means relying on something else for structural, but not nutritional, support. So, for example, an exoskeleton, as opposed to an internal skeleton, holding up your body's structure, would be an epiphytic structure. It has nothing to do with nutrition, it's support. Then there's hirsute. You might have heard this one, H-I-R-S-U-T-E, which means hairy. At one point, my ex-husband had a beard, and his hirsutiness, I don't think that's a real word, was not a subject of my greatest affection. Hirsute. Now we're getting into some really good ones, though. So, gerascophobia, G-E-R-A-S-C-O, phobia. Gerascophobia means fear of aging. And don't we all either experience that or know somebody who is gripped by it? Fear of our entire culture is filled with fear of aging and with adoration of youth. Whereas certain cultures, native, indigenous ones, really the oldest cultures on the face of the planet, have a reverence for aging that we, in our modern times, do not necessarily share. Gerascophobia. Then there's catalepsy. No, catalepsy does not go hand in paw with dogmatism. Catalepsy, C-A-T-A-L-E-P-S-Y, is the concept that it's impossible to understand anything. I'm very fond of this one. We're just cataleptic, just can't grasp it. Whatever it is, not in my wheelhouse. Then there is hireth, Hireath, hireth, which is a homesickness for a home to which you cannot return, which maybe never even existed in the first place. That's quite a beautiful and touching, if mournful word. Hireth, a homesickness for a home that you can't return to, which might have not ever even existed. Then there's two more, one of which I think is absolutely hilarious and I adore. Coddywomple. Coddiwomple. Coddywomple, which means to travel purposefully in a vague direction. I just love this word. And the last one is petrichor. Petrichor. Petrichor describes the smell of the earth after it rains. Ah, that's lovely. So, if you're experiencing gyroscophobia, fear of aging, and you find that you, of late, are cataleptic, you can't really understand anything, and you do experience a poignant hirethness, homesickness for the home you can't return to, which might not have ever existed, it's just fine to continue to coddywomple yourself, traveling purposefully in a vague direction until you reach a state where you can inhale the beauty of petrichor, the smell of the earth after it rains. Weird and wonderful words in English. In the surrealism corner. We have to take another break here, but I'll return directly with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
War, peace, gender gap. Those are all fighting words. There wasn't sufficient time earlier in the program to delve deeper into the new research on gender gap politics, or on what that widening gap holds as a promise for the peace of humankind. So I'd like to try, albeit superficially, to play with some of that here. For one thing, did you know that peace agreements last dramatically longer if women are involved in the negotiations? It's true. If women sign on to the agreement, 70% of such pacts last for 20 years or more. If not, only 25% last that long. One reason for this difference is that women put into the agreement solutions for many more community-based problems, and these are just the sort of issues that often lead to greater conflict. In other words, less posturing, please, and more attention to detail. Valerie Hudson, a professor at Texas A&M, has been studying the relationship between gender and international security for many years. She's written numerous articles demonstrating how violence against women and girls actually has a direct impact on levels of peace and stability in countries. And a few years ago, she and a group of scholars wrote a book on the subject called Sex and World Peace. She followed this with another book called The Hillary Doctrine, which examined the ways in which Hillary Rodham Clinton, when Secretary of State under President Obama, instituted specific measures to adapt and to further the politics behind this subject, from the micro level to the macro. Together, the two books make for a powerful argument. For example, quote, "We have found in conventional aggregate empirical testing that the best predictor of a state's peacefulness is not its level of wealth or its level of democracy or whether it is Islamic or not. The very best predictor of a state's peacefulness is its level of violence against women." Close quote. And here's another quote. Quote, "These are not the only findings that underscore the link between the security of women and the security of states. Scholars have found the larger the gap between men and women in society, the more likely a nation is to be involved in intra- and inter-state conflict, to be the aggressor, to use force first in a conflict, and to resort to higher levels of violence in a conflict. The days when one could claim that the situation of women had nothing to do with matters of national or international security are, frankly, over. The empirical results to the contrary are just too numerous and too robust." Period. Close quote. Hudson and her team find that the treatment of women informs human interaction at all levels of society, and they support their findings with detailed analyses and with color maps, harnessing an immense amount of data. They call attention to discrepancies between national laws protecting women and the enforcement of those laws, and they note the adverse effect on state security of abnormal sex ratios favoring males, the practice of polygamy, and unequitable realities in family law, among many other gendered aggressions. Their research challenges conventional definitions of security and democracy and shows that the treatment of gender informs the true clash of civilizations. This analysis extends to population numbers themselves, such as what happens to a society that has too many men. In a third book, titled Bare Branches, The Security Implications of Asia's Surplus Male Population, Hudson et al. Argue that historically high male-to-female ratios trigger domestic and then international violence. They suggest that the sex ratios of many Asian countries, particularly China and India, which together represent almost 40% of the world's population, are being skewed in favor of males on a scale unprecedented in human history. Through offspring sex selection, often in the form of sex-selective abortion and female infanticide, these countries are acquiring a disproportionate number of low-status young male adults, called bare branches by the Chinese. Prospects for peace and democracy are being doomed by the growth of bare branches in such countries and will have global implications on the 21st century. No stabilizing influence of females to marry and with whom to procreate means impending disaster, ranging from already charted rises in sex trafficking globally across borders all the way up to governments, which, realizing that excessive numbers of young, unattached males are likely to create havoc at home, literally foster antagonistic situations with neighbors so that they can ship these young men elsewhere, away from home, to fight. This, in turn, means, of course, that bottom-up as well as top-down approaches both are necessary for healing wounds of violence, whether in the family or in policy councils. All three books emphasize the importance of R2P, which stands for Responsibility to Protect. The United Nations ruling that nation-states have a responsibility to protect vulnerable nation-states. And there's also R2PW, which means responsibility to protect women. Neither policy is observed much. Mind you, these are not protections instituted in any patronizing manner. Rather, they face the realities of a profoundly embedded sexism, so old and deep that it's all but impossible to trace its outlines against any field or background, because in fact, it is the field. It is the background. Feminists internationally have been saying for years that the family is the microcosm of the state, not the worker, as Marx would have had it. In the family, we learn how life is experienced and expressed. In the family, we learn what's expected of us and how to meet such expectations. It isn't coincidental that all patrilineal, patrifocal, and patriarchal societies have instituted specific rituals to mark, usually with real or metaphorical bloodletting of some sort, the shift of a child's care from that of the mother to that of the father, the uncle, or related male figure. This is particularly true for male children, but it also takes related forms for females who, at such initiations, learn docility, obedience, and a so-called celebration of their womanhood, even unto female genital mutilation. From there on, the patriarchy has smooth sailing. This culturally relativistic process has been challenged in the United States foreign policy only once, under Hillary Rodham Clinton, with the Hillary Doctrine. At the onset of her term, she said, quote, "The subjugation of women is a threat to the common security of our world and to the national security of our country." John Kerry, who succeeded her as U.S. Secretary of State, dropped the approach. Afghanistan is another tragically apt example. An extreme patriarchy now facing economic chaos post the United Nations and United States withdrawals. It still refuses to include women in any talks or discussions on aid, no matter how desperate the aid needs are, or discussions on how to proceed going forward. No Afghan women, naturally, but even more shockingly, it won't meet with delegations from other countries that include any women. It is apparently beyond comprehension of Afghan men that their treatment of their sister citizens, openly and on a global scale, is atrocious and harmful even to Afghan men. This is not a gender gap. It's a gender chasm, a gender abyss. Given the worldwide backlash currently experienced by all of us with the rise of autocratic and even totalitarian regimes abroad and recently here at home, our first reaction is that it must be a backlash to feminism and progressive causes in general, but particularly a feminism in the major sense of giving voice and empowerment to half the human species. But I would argue that this is not backlash, which, after all, is a convoluted form of blaming the victim. I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and I believe that there's another name for it, more accurate, and I think we can dare to coin that word. That word is forelash. Forelash always has preceded backlash down through history, in a frantic attempt to stave off any risings of any oppressed. Forelash consists of the conscious, or semi or subconscious, realization on the part of, in this case, most men, and I specify most to avoid generalization, a realization that women are in fact coming to voice and to power, and that this will mean levels of change hitherto unimaginable in our species. Look at the forelash leading up to the Civil War in the United States. Check out the forelash before any open outbreak of hostilities, for that matter. It's always a terrified warning, the way a batterer clenches his jaw or flexes his fist at his wife and mutters, "Don't provoke me." Well, no one likes giving up power, or does so willingly. Patriarchy has been quite entrenched for a long, long time. What's more, its means are violent means, and it is aware that women's means, as history demonstrates, straight on up through the latest gender gap statistics, tend to be nonviolent. So, hey, why not storm and threaten? Why not stomp about in hip boots, crack whips, brandish swords, or cannons, or cyber tools, or poisons, or nuclear disaster? If women respond to threats and scurry back to their places, hey, bro, we got this made. Well, let's think this through, or at least start the thinking. If forelash comes from projected feelings of male fear, a fear so all-encompassing that it blinds them toward what women actually are about, which is not revenge at all, then how do we address it? How respond to that fear to lower it? It won't scare us, because we know backlash is inevitable anyway. In fact, it may prepare us the better to combat it. We'll be ready for it instead of being surprised. I don't have facile, instant answers about what to do with forelash, tactics, and strategy. I mean, after all, I just came up with the word itself. But I do have a strong feeling that this is somehow on the right track. And that track begins with naming the problem. From there on, then we can figure out how we respond. On the one hand, there's Gandhi, the civil rights movement in this country. The styles of Native Americans and other indigenous peoples all have been nonviolent, principled, borrowed from women's styles, interestingly enough, and all have worked, but only to a degree and for a while. The clock is ticking now, with the planet itself endangered, so we don't have much time. But that works both ways. It affects our strategies and affects those of our adversary, the patriarchy. All I know so far is that this starts with 3 interconnected things. The latest statistics on gender gap, the unprecedented rising numbers among young people experiencing gender gap, and a weird and wonderful word, forelash. So let's put it out there, share it, start spreading it around, and see if it floats. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.